So hi there. Thanks for joining us for our new series, ALD Career Conversations. So last year, ALD updated our tagline to taking you from first year to career. And this series looks to do that. It looks to explore the connection between first year and the path that it takes to get to your first career in this case, economics. So thank you to Charlie for being here with us today. And we're excited to have so many of our members on today. So we'll start out by doing a quick introduction. Eileen and I will facilitate tonight. So Eileen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Eileen Merberg, and I'm the Executive Director of Alpha Lambda Delta, working in the national office in upstate New York with Trish.
And I'm Trish Maxwell. I'm the Director of Communication for Alpha Lambda Delta, and I've been with ALD for about 6 years, I think. And tonight we're going to meet Charlie Manzanares. He was inducted into ALD in 1998. He was the Mariah Leonard Graduate Fellowship recipient, which is the top fellowship you can get for ALD. He received his PhD in economics from Vanderbilt and his JD and MBA from Baylor University. Charlie was also on the council, the National Council of Alpha Lambda Delta. And fun fact, he comes from an ALD family, many of which are here today. So his sister Christina was also an ALD member and a fellowship winner. And both of his parents are ALD advisors. And his mom, Deborah, currently sits as Vice President of Finance. So he lives in Seattle, Washington, and he's the Senior Economist Manager for Amazon. So we'll start by breaking the ice with a few easy questions, Charlie. So if you could only eat one meal for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Oh my goodness. Well, first of all, yeah, thanks again for having me. I'm so excited to participate in an ALD discussion. So I had a wonderful experience as an ALD student, and then an experience on the National Council. And it's just been a great organization for us. And then, now my family's involved. So I'm super excited to be here, by the way. So yeah, back to your question. This is, and my family will recognize this. So part of my family is from Venezuela. That's where my dad was born and raised, and my aunt is on the call. She's was born and raised there as well. There we eat something called arepa con suero. So if I could have that, now that wouldn't be healthy to eat for every meal for the rest of my life, but it would be wonderful until I basically died of malnutrition, I think. But
Very good. It sounds wonderful. If you won an all expense paid 7-day vacation, and let's pretend that COVID doesn't exist or that it's wiped off the face of the earth and magically disappeared, where would you go?
I think I would go back to, so I had a great experience in Barcelona. So I think I would go there again. I think I see some agreement.
Very cool.
Nice. And what did you want to be when you were younger?
Goodness. So a lot of things, and that's changed a lot. And that certainly, I'm sure, is related to the topic. Started, I think maybe the first one was veterinarian. And then that evolved quite a bit. So to a number of different things. You asked me which one I wanted to be first. I think that was the first one.
Okay, on to the more serious things. You mentioned a little bit about Alpha Lambda Delta, so that's great to hear. Can you say a little bit more about what role ALD played? And this isn't a conversation just about ALD, it's going to be about your career and your major and how those interact. But let's start with ALD. You were apparently involved, but talk about your involvement. What motivated you to join, and what did you get out of it? I think particularly at the undergraduate level.
Sure. Yeah. So ALD was actually one of my first leadership positions. So ALD gave me the opportunity to be vice president of the local chapter. And I, ran for that kind of on a whim. We did our elections. I'm sure a lot of people do them differently. Ours were at the main dinner, so our induction dinner. Then at the very end, we decided, let's go ahead and, elect officers for the next year. I decided to run for that. Surprisingly got it. I didn't expect to. And then it turned out to be, one of my first leadership positions at school or at college. And it was really one of the first where I had the opportunity to, participate in setting the the direction, the strategic direction for an organization, at least at the local level. So I found that to be just wonderful, especially because of the, kind of the broad mandate that ALD set out. It was very much about doing some good things for the community, and it was about doing them, with a bunch of people who obviously had worked really hard in their first year and distinguished themselves. And so to me, you combine those two things, and you have a bunch of talented people to work with to go out and do a bunch of good things, and that just was a lot of fun. And to me, it gave me some confidence that I could do that. So after having that experience for the first time, really, and then that led to me trying to do that in other organizations and in other contexts. But that really was how I got started with ALD. Outside of my experience with the National Council was a lot of fun, and similarly, I think gave me even more confidence that I could try to contribute. By working with really nice, talented, high integrity people. To do that sort of thing, but even on a bigger scale. So just kind of gave me the same lesson, but bigger.
Great, thanks.
So kind of talking about your undergrad experience, what was your undergrad major? I guess, what was the plan then? Was it to go into economics? Was it something different? Can you talk a little bit about your academic experiences and how it prepared you for your career?
Yeah, so what I can say is it was just a perfectly straight line between what I'm doing now and what I set out to do as an undergrad, which is completely a joke. So I started not knowing. I started as a chemistry student, and I really liked lab work. I liked science. My dad was a chemist. It seemed to fit. I enjoyed it for a while. I didn't like some of, I actually found being in a particular lab to be monotonous. So at some point, I decided to double major. So I took a course in economics. I really loved it. There was a really good professor there at my university at the time. His name was Bill Bright. He was the author of a few books in economics that were actually murder mysteries where economic sleuths solve the mystery. It seems outrageous unless you're an econ major and you like that stuff, in which case it was just fascinating. And so I took that class, realized, hey, I really like economics. This is strange. This is so far out of my field. Started taking more courses and then got a double major in economics. Fork in the road, right after undergrad, I decided to specialize more on the econ side, although I took a number of detours along the way, and started with my first job in the government, so at the Federal Reserve, working in economic research there. Bunch of detours along the way that I think have been super useful. So I'd love to talk about those as well. But that's essentially how I got started as an undergrad.
Yeah, and I think those detours are important. I know my personal path was the same way. I had a major in communications and graduated and was like, well, I'll never use that again. And then here I am 15 years later as director of communications. So
Right.
But all those experiences help add. So yes, we'd love to hear about those as well.
Yeah, and let me segue, because that's a good segue, and let me sort of frame the question, because Trish mentioned our byline for Alpha Lambda Delta has the word path in it. So that's really what we're talking about, is your path might have been, this way. And mine was, a lot of people, most people are, there's no one straight line. So talk about your path, that path, the roadways that you took, but also, and I think so, include, if you can, for the audience and future students watching this, what types of experiences as an undergrad helped with your path. So did you have internships as an undergrad? Did you do research with a faculty member? Had you mentored with were you mentored by a faculty member? Things that sort of helped you on that path as well. So
definitely, yeah. So so one book I think that I found particularly useful as a retrospective on my particular path is a book. I wanted to just plug this by a guy named David Epstein. It's not the only book on this topic, but it's called Range. And that book is kind of a counterpoint to a different book that I had encountered a few years back, which is called Outliers. That's by Malcolm Gladwell. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with both, but I'd love to describe those quickly. the Malcolm Gladwell, what he, his big thesis, and I know his book is way more complicated than this, but the big takeaway there is, hey, check it out. If you want to get good at something, and he starts looking at chess players, et cetera, what you need to do is you need to specialize. You need to specialize early, specialize as a little kid. Don't even think about what you're going to do. Just specialize in that one task over and over and over again. And make sure you get your 10,000 hours was the big buzz line out of that book. And once you do, you're going to be a master. And by the way, check it out. Bill Gates, spent about 10,000 hours, et cetera. So now that's a thesis, right? And a number of different people have written about that, put a bunch of nuances on that. But I think the probably the best position, counterweight book to that is the Range book by Epstein. And what he says is, hey, check it out. That's fine for tasks that don't change very much over time. So if you're talking about chess and the rules are fixed and there really is only a finite set of things to learn, then certainly, the more you specialize, the earlier you specialize, the better you're going to get at it. But in a world where things are changing a lot, and in fact, changing all the time, and I would argue now, and I don't think I need to argue this, that stuff changes way more rapidly now than it used to. In that kind of environment, and he was describing, people like Roger Federer, who basically he played literally every other sport before he played tennis, and then became the #1 tennis player in the world. Did not specialize at all until he was basically in his 20s. And he said, look, there's certain environments where actually building up range, so a bunch of different experiences that make you extremely adaptable, that's essentially a better preparation for kind of the fast-paced, fast-changing environment that we live in now, an accelerating environment we live in now. And I think that advice is probably most relevant, I think, for how, everything I've seen, certainly in my field, everything I've seen at our company at Amazon, things are changing so quickly that I think there's a much bigger premium on feeling comfortable jumping through a bunch of different, disciplines, picking things up, learning how to learn and how to learn quickly, and then applying those things and kind of, pulling from different traditions and creating things out of combining those traditions. That's probably a much more important skill set, I think, for today's world. And that's essentially what, thank goodness, my wandering, I think, kind of gave me that range without thinking about it. And I know I'm not unique, that you guys are describing a similar experience where, as an undergraduate, what I did was I said, look, so I really wanted to learn, I was a chemistry major, econ major, but I said I would love to go deep. Part of what interested me about economics is how our economies work. And so I want to go deep in how marketing works. So I did a marketing internship. I want to go deep into how finance works. So I did a finance internship. I did a couple of summers of undergraduate research. And then I did an internship with the Federal Reserve. So each summer, right, that's just a different experience. You have, 4 or 5 summers in undergrad. And each one of those turned out to be something different. I think that ended up making me comfortable jumping around fields, which in turn made it really easy to come back. So I ended up doing some graduate work in business and law. And really what I wanted to do there was see if I could combine, any part of those fields, do some research together with like law and economics, try to combine those fields to create a niche. And then ended up studying as a PhD econ student, and that led to the job I have now. Now, one interesting note, just to close this thought, is that actually the entire industry, that economists working in tech, didn't really exist even when I started my PhD. So I think to me it was another confirmation. So really, economics at Amazon, for example, started getting big in 2012 is really when it started taking off. I started my PhD in economics in 2010. So there was almost no mechanical way for me to even anticipate that I would, join this career when I started my degree, because this type of career hadn't even existed yet. So I think another argument for creating as much range as you can, or if you feel that impulse, that actually could be a good thing to do as an undergraduate.
Yeah, I'm always a fan of kind of devil's advocate. So, your path is more of the range piece. If you look at some of the people you work with, if someone said, that's great, Charlie, but I don't want a pinball, I want like that straight shot, what's the best way to get there? Or what does that experience look like? From looking at some of your colleagues, what is it?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so I think there are some things that are sort of evergreen. I think where range, range is important, but it's not. At some point, you do have to learn the skills. So, for example, some of my colleagues are software engineers. Now, so part of their job you can describe as a job that would be best suited by getting range, and then part of their job you would describe as something that essentially was a set of evergreen skills they built up over the course of their life. What do I mean? I mean, so learning how to code generically in a language, in a computer language, learning how computers work, learning how like binary code works, like all the fundamentals of how computers works. That's something that takes years to learn. That's something that you got to specialize in. You can't just pick it up in a few days. But if on the flip side, if you take a particular coding language and say, I'm just going to be a specialist in one language, that's not going to serve you well, right? You have to be, I mean, this almost the second that software engineers get here, probably within the first or second year, they have to completely switch the coding language that they're working with. Many of them, like, oh my goodness, we just introduced a new technology called Spark and now Scala, or these are the terms that, goodness, I'm still learning them. I'm still picking them up, but every couple of years, at least from what I've seen, the software paradigms, like the actual languages, change. So that's the part I think where range is important.
Yeah, I was going to just ask, based on what you said earlier, if you've heard of the hedgehog and the fox.
I've heard of that. Yeah, could you remind me what the? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's an ancient Greek philosopher talked about the hedgehog and the fox, and like the fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one really big thing, how to,
Oh,
protect
wow.
itself.
Yeah.
But the fox, so it's sort of the survival and success of both those animals based on only knowing one thing, but really good at it. And then
Right.
the fox so your generalist idea is the fox and the specialist is
Got
the
it.
hedgehog.
Oh,
It's
awesome.
fascinating stuff.
It sure is. Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, it's all, everything's a function of time, right? So the problem is, so ideally we could just know everything, right? And the problem is that, yeah, I mean, I think about this as an economist. Maybe this is too mechanical, but I mean, it's just a function of time. What can you possibly learn as a function of
Yeah.
time? Where do you put your thought power? And is it interesting, right? We're humans. It should be interesting, exciting. So
talk to me about what a typical day looks like for you as a senior economist.
sure. Yeah, it's so typical days. So I like my days to start early, and I think people have flexibility. So typically in tech, I mean, it depends. Some people are very rigid with their time, but usually you have more flexibility to shift your schedule either early or late. Some of my colleagues go super late, or start super late and go super late. So I start relatively early. What I'm trying to do is usually create some time to actually get really focused work done. So part of my job is to think carefully about, so as a manager and sometimes as an economist at Amazon, you're thinking carefully about an area. So just to back up, a strategic area at Amazon would be like, hey, we are trying to think through a decision on, and I've got to be especially cryptic, I think, but a decision on where to invest our resources. So do we want to invest a little bit more in Prime Video as part of the Prime bundle? So I work in particular at Amazon Prime. And of course, we're investing a lot of money in different areas to try to make the membership better. So should we invest in Prime Video or our next dollar in faster shipping or a different kind of shipping or different selection? And so as I spend the morning trying to think, carefully about some particular strategic area like that, how would we set it up? How would we write a document about that? So at Amazon, it's very much about writing documents. I think that may be peculiar among companies. Typically, we review those. They're very much like legal memoranda. That's all we talk about. There are no PowerPoints. And so what we're trying to do is motivate, a review date, a document where this work stream contributes. And so we spend, my mornings is spending a lot of that time kind of strategizing over where to put the team's energy. And then we get sucked into typically some planning for the team. So part of my day is devoted to almost economists at Amazon work almost like software engineers, where we set up processes to where we communicate a lot about what pieces of either what's called statistical software we're building and who's building it, what part, is that ready? What's in the queue? What's being built? Or we're talking about review dates and where we're going to use the statistical software to inform a decision, for example. And so I'm meeting a lot with the team throughout the day, just to one, to plan their time, and then two, to help them unblock. So we think carefully about the science. We get stuck with the science. As you can imagine, it's science is hard, whether you're in a company or out of a company. You just get stuck. It's confusing sometimes. Stuff never, sometimes stuff never works, right? And it's unforgiving in that way. So we spend that time, and then occasionally, or not occasionally, but almost routinely, we're spending time with product managers. Is what the title of the typically the business role is. And they're actually taking what we build and thinking carefully about the life cycles of those as products. Now, for us, we're building internal products, artificial intelligence that basically feeds decisions within the company. So they're thinking about, hey, this new product, when do we release it? When we release version 2, what are its use cases? How do we prioritize our time? So we're working with them to think through those things. So it's a mix of trying to create some time to think, building software together with the team, and then meeting with business partners to try to get the most value out of what we're building, I think, is the typical day.
I'm going to assume that our students here today, and those again watching in the future, are economic majors. Are there other majors that they might be, and what other careers are possible in with a major in economics, and any advice you have about that? So I just wonder if, and we'll open it up for them to ask questions if they want, but I essentially want to hear if you have advice for them and sort of talk about the different career possibilities or the different majors they might have.
Awesome. Yeah. So I guess for all of those of you majoring in economics, congratulations, you made the right decision. But no, joking aside, so yeah, economics is a great major, I think, for thinking carefully and rigorously about trade-offs that we face. Just about every situation you can think of in life, in our economy, et cetera, we're facing trade-offs. How to tee up and make decisions, I think, are really is something economics is particularly good at. Now, granted, economics is almost always best combined with something. So I would encourage everybody who's majoring in economics to minor in something else, to get a bunch of experience in something else as well. So some, typical combinations, for example, if you're planning on getting a PhD in economics and specializing in that, typical combinations are economics and mathematics, or economics and computer science. If you're thinking about being a tech economist, the computer science part is especially important. Mathematics is always important. Of course, if you're interested in studying, how the world works, history, et cetera, economics can be a good feeding point to other graduate degrees. I think it's one of the most popular majors for law students to have as undergrads. Certainly, it's a popular major for business students to have. It can be well combined with, a business degree as well, or a history degree, or, and then go get maybe a PhD in history, and that could be particularly informative. So for anybody from other majors, certainly there are a lot of paths. So I just want to plug there a number of paths. So certainly in big companies. So that's where I have a lot of experience. Business paths, software engineering paths, et cetera, in places like Amazon, where there are a number of wonderful careers in companies where you can pursue. Where you have a bunch of different backgrounds. I think your question was related to what else can you do with econ. So a few things I would want to plug. A lot of economists go, so certainly into the business world, and they're, business professionals. They work for the government as well. So government agencies are typically making a lot of decisions, partnering with economists. And then, of course, a lot of economists, people who specialize in economics, go to teach at universities as well. So those are the kind of the three big, and now tech. There's a thing called tech economists and company economists, which is growing in popularity.
Great. Thank you.
So if you If you had to give one piece of advice, like I wish I had known, in reference to having, to exploring the field of being an economist, what would you share? What do you wish you knew?
Sure. I think with economics, probably, and this wasn't to say that I hadn't been warned, but as much I think mathematics as possible is just at a premium. Now that may or may not be exciting. So I think mathematics is really interesting, um, but it's almost like the common language that economists used to speak. And then a second big thing is, if I had to do it over again, I would probably major in econ and some combination of econ, mathematics, and computer science, just because I use computer science all the time. I constantly, am trying to learn from my computer science colleagues. And so that, particularly for my field, I think those three foundational pieces are the thing, that I probably would have started with earlier, but you pick them up over time. It's just a matter of how much do you want to learn with any given day, because you will have to catch up on those skills if you're an economist.
Do you have a favorite part of your career, of your life right now, and what you do? You work for a great company, and a kind of a big company, I've heard. Yeah, a favorite thing?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, Amazon is particularly inventive. So I really like, in particular, I like the combination of using science to create things, and in particular, create things in an entrepreneurial way. Just it seems like out of thin air. So a lot of what we do is actually, and this is another part I really like, is that I get to use a combination of scientific skills and I work with a bunch of professionals in computer science and science, other types of statistics, like who specialize in things like machine learning and artificial intelligence. We combine those things with tools in econometrics. Figuring out how to combine those tools to create value is particularly interesting. And then working with business people to actually plan for something that doesn't exist, think through how we might model the value of something that doesn't exist, and then create it. That process we go through all the time, and it's just a window into things. Now, many of those things, there's a big experimentation culture at Amazon, so many of those things will fail. But how do you do that how do you create processes for doing that in a way that's systematic, in a way where you're not kind of wasting time and money, experimenting, kind of optimally over different opportunities like that. I just love that space. So I'd say every day is kind of fun. It's a lot of work, but super fun.
Sounds great. Yeah.
Eileen, do you have any other questions?
No, why don't we open it up to our participants. You can either, please feel free to turn your cameras on. Thank you, Tyler and Preston, and any others, feel free to. So go ahead and unmute yourselves and ask, or please feel free to type a question, hi Leila, in the chat if you'd like. So does anybody have any questions for Charlie they want to ask, or comments or anything?
I have a question.
Yes.
First off, thank you for being with us today, Charlie. Appreciate it. I'm a finance major and I'm minoring in economics, and I really want to go on to graduate school, and I'm looking to be like a financial advisor and get into the investment field after I finish schooling. Awesome. And I see like the best investors like Warren Buffett, Michael Burry, they all got, when they went to graduate school, they all got their master's in economics. So learning what you learned, do you think there's like correlation there? Because everyone's telling me like, go get your MBA, like maybe economics isn't the best. So if you were in my shoes, what would you go into?
Oh man, that's a great question. So I'm particularly biased, but so I think I do agree that probably the straightest path, if your ambition is pretty clear that, hey, I want to be a financial advisor, I think the straightest path is probably through getting an MBA or some sort of financial specialty in an MBA. Only because right now fields have gotten so specialized that you'll spend a ton of time as in a master's of econ program just learning really intense statistics and coding and mathematics, and so you'll feel disconnected a little bit from finance. Now, it's certainly not in the spirit again of getting range, right? I think it actually isn't a bad idea. So if you, not everybody who, not everybody wants to reach a particular path in like a extremely short amount of time, right? And to be honest, I wouldn't encourage that unless you just are crystal clear exactly what you want to do. I would encourage a little bit of exploration. And the cool part about econ programs, especially terminal masters programs, you might find a program that'll actually pay for you to be there. And so that could be another, it could be a relatively inexpensive way, depending on the program. Like, and the way you pay for that, by the way, is you do research for a professor there. Many programs will actually give you a research assistantship, and then they're literally paying for you to get an econ degree. And so it is a diversion if that's your ambition, but you might learn some stuff that would make you even better as a financial advisor. So,
Thank you.
Do you see many bankers make a transition into like kind of C-suite or kind of a higher up role in Amazon?
Bankers, and what do you mean? So starting basically a career like through a bank, and then like moving into a company.
Exactly. Yeah. Like,
Got it.
mostly the sell side banks.
So I think it could happen. Now, granted, if you really want to be an executive leader at a big company, I think statistically your best shot is actually to work your way up through the company. Now, granted, of course, there are a lot of other paths, but a lot of times. So, for example, if you see big headline was that Jeff Bezos just recently changed to be executive chair of the board or whatever, and of course, the person they tagged for that to replace him was somebody with 25 years of internal experience with Amazon.
CEO,
right?
right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So and that's kind of the path right now. That doesn't mean, of course, we may not be talking about I want to jump in as CEO, right? Right off the bat. You could still potentially jump in as like a director at Amazon, which is still a relatively senior role, gives you a great path, to going higher from a different experience. And by the way, the experience that we see a lot of is, like management consulting. So people go to McKinsey and places like that, and then they come in and then work their way up. That's a valuable experience. But we have a lot of business development at Amazon. And there's certainly a ton of use for people with a variety of skill sets. So I imagine you could definitely, in fact, I had a lawyer friend who just started working at Amazon as a litigation risk specialist. So at these big companies, they need pretty much everything, right? They're in so many spaces, they need a lot of skill sets. So I would encourage you to do whatever seems interesting, where you're learning a ton right off the bat, and keep doing those things. And then at some point, you will have cool opportunities to make the transfer to companies if you want. So.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
What was your first job like right out of college?
So my first job was as what's called a research assistant at the Federal Reserve in DC there. So it was quite, it's very structured. So that particular job, now granted, it's a little bit of a shock. That's why I would encourage basically to, people to get an internship, just because it's a little bit like you suddenly are thrust in a role where you get a lot of responsibility. And if you have just a little bit of practice with that, that's a good thing. Now, I'm talking to people in ALD who probably have a ton of practice doing that kind of stuff. But for me, that was one of the bigger shocks, was like, they would hand me a data set, right? And they're like, well, hope you do a good job, because otherwise we might, misallocate like $100 million here. And I'm like, oh my goodness, why are you giving me this job? That sounds hard. I'm scared. Right. And then I wouldn't say that out loud. I would say that internally. And then, they just focus really hard on making sure that I got the numbers right. But anyway, that's kind of the biggest shock is getting levels of responsibility. Now that should be structured, right? If you get thrown into a job right when you graduate and people are giving you these things that feel insane in terms of responsibility, it's probably not a well-structured entry level job. You should be protected a bit, given, smaller chunks of stuff to begin with. So that I would mainly just look for a really good, institution where you're going to learn a lot, and make sure your manager coming in sounds like a, reasonable person. And then that'll kind of protect you, allow that learning experience.
Your boss can make or break your experience. That's for sure.
That's true. Yeah, exactly. Translation. Yeah.
Yeah. So a question in the chat. So you talked about doing internship. Did you do an internship at Amazon? Do they even exist? How might you get one if they do exist?
So it's a good question. They don't. So I think they exist, but for people, I think in graduate school, Now there are ways to work at Amazon, I think, as undergraduates, and I think there are a number of pathways actually in the fulfillment centers themselves. And I have seen people actually do that. So they work in a fulfillment center for a while. They work as an assistant manager or something. Now, granted, this may be right after undergrad. I think maybe some people start as undergrads, but you go and then you kind of work your way up, and you get a ton of operations experience. And that's particularly valuable. Most people are in some graduate program, like we have MBA interns, huge classes of those. We have PhD interns. So we're, for example, hiring one this summer, and they do some sort of, that's about it. There might be a few pathway internships that are particularly specialized, but mostly at big companies, I think what you're going to find is that they are graduate level internships.
And is it necessary to get a graduate degree? I know some professions you pretty much count on getting one, some you don't need it, and you can kind of go, with an undergrad. What is your experience, or what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I think, as you mentioned, I think it depends on the particular discipline or the role. So for example, at Amazon, and this isn't as rigid necessarily at every company, but in economics roles, you have to have a PhD in economics. There's basically there's only one. Of course, that's in fields that are super specialized, as you could imagine. And so in business roles, there is no equivalent qualification. I've seen people come straight from undergrad, get a job as like a business analyst or like what's called an L4 product manager, and work their way all the way up. And so I think for roles, I mean, as you could imagine, for roles where they require, to be honest, a lot more varied experiences, a lot more creativity, you could potentially come in and not have a graduate degree and just show a ton of professional promise on the job, and avoid getting that. Now, granted, a lot of people actually do start here and then they go, get an MBA on the side or graduate degrees along the way, which Amazon tries to make fairly easy.
That'd be great.
I might have missed this earlier. Sorry, I came in a little bit late. What made you do the transition from a Federal Reserve role into something else, looking at a different field?
So the Federal Reserve, it's a really good job, especially that research assistant job is a really good job for like recent graduates of undergrad for econ majors, basically. And what they do is they put you through, it's almost like a boot camp of learning how to code a little bit in statistical software languages. You do some economic research, you usually handle some kind of production process there at the Federal Reserve. Like the group I work for was called the Flow of Funds team at the Federal Reserve. And they produce this one thing, which is the Flow of Funds reports, which is kind of like our financial accounts for the US. And so you specialize basically in those two tasks. It's great experience. A lot of people do that before they then go off to graduate school in something else, or business careers. And so, like, for example, maybe a third of my class went on to get a PhD in economics. The rest went to law school or business school. So yeah, it's kind of a role where a lot of people actually transition to other experiences after doing it.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much. Thanks for all the students for coming, and Charlie's family for joining. But thank you, of course, to Charlie for your time, your expertise, great advice, great information, and great connecting for a great connection for Alpha Lambda Delta. So we so appreciate your support of ALD over the years, and certainly for tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Eileen. Thanks, Trish. Yeah, thanks everybody, and my family for joining, and the students for joining. Yeah, definitely. Please ping me on LinkedIn. We'd love to keep in contact. Usually it's every time I speak with ALD students, then a few years later, I'm just seeing like all the awesome things they're doing. So I anticipate, 5 years from now, I'll be trying to ping you guys on LinkedIn. So
that's right.
Please,
We'll
love to make the contact.
try and remember all these names.
Yeah, exactly.